Imagine this. You are on the Ebb and Flow podcast and with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, the author of Toward a Meaningful Life. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself and your own personal story with the Rebbe and how it really lit a fire in you to spread his message and write this book and all that you've been continuously doing.
Well, we're going back many years now to my teenage years. You know, those teenage years. You remember yours?
I'm only 24, so not long ago.
Right. So those teenage years were your formative years, and you're looking, you're seeking, trying to find who you are. And I guess was what you can call a rebel without a cause. I had a lot of energy in me, and I was ideological. I wanted to do something with my life. And I was looking, and I saw unfortunately, I saw a lot of mediocrity and lack of passion and lack of vision and energy in life. Make a long story short, I began being very intrigued by the mystical teachings of Judaism, Kabbalistic and Hasidic teachings. It spoke to my soul. Though I'd grown up in yeshiva and I went through all the Talmudic classes, but Talmud was very technical, very mechanical, very brilliant, but didn't touch my soul, to be honest. But the Hasidic teaching started to touch, and it was like music to my ears as I related very much to its inner message. And that's what ignited a spark in me, and I began to explore further. And that's when I began to understand. I grew up in Crown Heights, USA, and I began to appreciate and understand that the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was the seventh Chabad Rebbe, was really truly a revolutionary, just dressed in traditional garb, looking to seeking to change the world. And I was very taken by that, because that's what I wanted to be part of, some way of changing the world, you know. Yeah. And I became more involved, and I began to very, very fascinated by these teachings, and I got closer, and I wanted to really have access to the Rebbe. So I began working with a small group of people who would remember and memorize the talks that he delivered on Shabbos and holiday, which were hours and hours of talks, and you had to remember them verbatim and then publish them. So I worked my way up, and by 1979 I became the main writer of these talks. So I had direct access to the Rebbe. I was able to ask him questions, and I took full advantage and exploited the situation as best as I could to ask and provoke, because I felt I have access to such a spiritual master. Let's go for it. And that really, I look back as my whole life, I became a rebel with a cause, and the cause was to create a spiritual revolution, to be honest, a revolution where a change of consciousness, higher the sensitivity and the consciousness of human beings of all walks of life, Jew or non-Jew, observant or non-observant. And over those years in the 80s, I worked a lot extensively, essentially behind closed doors, behind the library walls of research and academia and deeply scholarly writings. But then in the 90s, after the Rebbe had a stroke in 1992 and then passed away in 1994, I went ahead and wrote the book Toward a Meaningful Life, which distilled these teachings, in general, the universal Jewish teachings, in a psychological type of personal growth book, which was published by a major publisher, William Morrow. And that began the next stage in my life. In 1995 and on, that book was very successful, reached millions of people, translated into many languages, 13 languages. And that launched my next stage, which was the Meaningful Life Center, an outgrowth of the name of the book, which is what I do now. It's basically bridging the spiritual and the secular and helping people find purpose and meaning in their lives. And I can tell you now, in this pandemic, obviously all this has taken on a whole new dimension, because the people are really vulnerable and receptive, and everyone's looking for some deeper inner stimulation when all your outer lives are disrupted, your work, school, travel plans,
Mm-hmm.
entertainment, you name it. So this is, so I've been really on overdrive working on delivering all kinds of programs to help people build their, let's call it spiritual, emotional, psychological immunity,
Mm-hmm.
which is equally important as is physical health. That's in a nutshell my life.
I'm curious. Well, first of all, thank you for all that you're doing and sharing it. I'm curious, what kind of questions, being so, you had the fortunate privilege to be so close with the Rebbe. What kind of questions would you ask, and what was it about his nature that would just answer certain ways?
Well, a few key things I would point out. The Rebbe was a very sharp mind and thinker. And you know, when you're dealing with human condition and human problems, is you can look at things on symptomatic level. You look at symptoms. Someone says, I'm depressed, sad,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not motivated. And then there's looking at things at the root level, which is what's the root of it all. Mm-hmm. And the Rebbe was a very, very keen at that. I learned that methodology of cutting through the smoke screens and all the distractions and getting what is the root of an issue.
Yeah.
People tell you what they tell you is only the effects it has. It's not the root.
They tell you the solutions.
And once you understand the root, you can advise and interventions that can actually help. Like, for example, for many people, there's symptoms. They maybe have addiction. And I've been doing a few programs on addictions now because quarantine and addiction is, unfortunately, they feed each other. So what's the root of addiction is a healthy need for attachment. We all need attachment and love. You don't find it in a healthy way, you start looking in all the unhealthy places or substances or behaviors. So by understanding the root, you can really help people find another alternative way to channel that need. Mm-hmm. In healthy. It's like a person who's, let's say, very thirsty and desperate, they'll drink poison even. And you want toxins and you want them to drink healthy water. So when you understand the root, you can solve many more issues and do them in a more permanent and lasting way, not a quick fix. That's just one example. And I can go on and on, different insights and how it's really methodology. It's how to think about challenges, how to look at an issue, not treat, as I said, the symptoms at the root. Empowerment is a big one, empowering people, not to give them the fish, but teach them how to catch fish.
You bring up an excellent point that I kind of was wanted to ask at least later on. However, it's a perfect transition, and it dives into the whole. My question that I'll then preface with is what the Jewish approach that the Rebbe also emphasized to this transformational process, and that includes what kind of tools and practices are taught to be able to increase this self-awareness, increase this understanding of methodology and connecting with Hashem. Because part of the process of transformation requires becoming aware of these familiar habit patterns of the mind and beginning to quote unquote break that habit. And as the Rebbe taught, and you mentioned in the introduction, lifting the veil of modern life, where there's many different veils of illusions we have. For example, and in later in the book, you mention a lot about, we have to define God. And many people have an intellectual understanding of what God is without the emotional kind of experience that you're sharing a little bit. You touched on that the Rebbe not only embodied, but was able to share with you. So therefore, the different habits or ways we have of thinking, because sometimes thinking is a habit of itself, or a habitual pattern of thinking a certain way. And we now have like brain scans and things to show that it's embossed neurologically. So I'm really curious because, what's becoming more and more popular is meditation, because you can get beyond, the body, and you can get beyond thinking habitual ways to really start to notice these different patterns.
Absolutely. Look, we are often a product of our product, or even a victim of circumstances, which also turns us into habitual creatures. We follow habits and patterns, either developed in early age in our homes, in our schools, social pressure and social norms. And once you get into a rut or a pattern or routine, it's very hard to break out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a good pattern, great. But if it's a bad pattern or it's a bad way of thinking, we build deep prejudices and deep stereotypes based on that. And when we know how hard it is to break a habit. So one of the great challenges in any type of growth is to challenge yourself, your mindset. You know, we're prejudiced. We have certain biases. We think about things in ways that are not necessarily always healthy, but it's very hard to change because it's like once you, let's say you're a tennis player and you're just striking the racket the wrong way and become your habit, it's very hard to change that. But with work, you can do that, but you have to recognize that, because the first step in all growth is awareness of the problem. Mm-hmm. If you deny there's a problem, or you escape from it, or you avoid it, you're not going to solve anything. So awareness, key is awareness. And once there's awareness, you can begin to grow and develop new ways of looking at things. You talk about change of consciousness. Look, the idea of a Messianic world, the idea of a world of world peace and higher spiritual consciousness is not a fantasy. Every system, whether Jewish or not, every spiritual system, anyone always has dreamt of a better world. Even science dreams of creating a better world, eradicating disease, eradicating pandemics like the one we're facing, the extending life expectancy, building better communications, that we can transcend time and space through technologies and so on. So everybody's looking for a more perfect world. The question is, what means a more perfect world? Is it just simply that you have a faster mobile phone? Or we see now in this life that our external systems are not what defines life. We thought we would never be able to exist without going to work, or without our summer plans, or without the other security blankets. And now we realize that we're human beings, we're vulnerable, fragile human beings. And what really matters are things like love, your relationships, your value system. What do you want to give to the world? What kind of mark you want to make? So this alone is a consciousness changer, because it makes people think differently. Because again, the worst possible thing for growth and excellence is comfort zones. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to be comfortable, but a comfort zone is very nice, but you know what? It doesn't motivate you, because then you just stay stuck there. So I see any type of real change in life and revolution comes always through some disruption, through some discomfort. You'll see all the greatest inventions in history usually came through pain, through some loss, some trauma, some challenge. Because, you know, the Talmud puts it this way, the olive